next session, which is on 3D high-density spatial measurements. So Suzanne van Eekelen of Deltares will present innovative measurement technologies offering opportunities for groundbreaking research. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Hello, good morning. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Good. I will be presenting about three-dimensional high-density spatial measurements. I've not done this work alone, not at all. Here are some of the contributors to this story. It is based on a report to be published 9/5, to be published by the end of the month, as Tom has explained. And the most important message is I'm going to tell about measurement techniques that are available in some facilities. Sometimes the measurement technique has been available, not necessarily now, and in other cases a measurement technique can have been developed recently. So in each case, if you think about starting a project, submitting a proposal, contact the facility early. If you know which facility, then that facility. But if you don't know, if you don't have an idea, then any facility is fine, because they will guide you towards the facility that fits best, and then discuss the possibilities. There are, in most cases, there are possibilities. So this presentation is to give an idea what might be possible, but please discuss it. What are we talking about? Three-dimensional high-density spatial measurements. So that's not single-point measurements, but high-density spatial measurements. So a lot of measurement in a certain space. Two-dimensional can be along a line, or three-dimensional can be the settlements of a surface, or even a full three-dimensional image of the deformations, for example, in a soil body. This row is about deformations. We can also want to characterize a soil body on soil type, on density of soil, stiffness, saturation, or temperature. In former times, we did this with boreholes, taking samples. And now we have techniques that we can use to look into a soil body. And I will show you some of them. So this presentation focuses on the three-dimensional high-density measurements. In this presentation, of course, we have to limit ourselves for now. We focus on deformations and characterization, and I will start with deformations, and then there's a three-dimensional PIV and optic fibers. About three-dimensional PIV, this is a major technique. It's basically using photos and then detecting movements in a series of photos. And this technique has been in use for fluid mechanics for over 40 years already. And in the beginning of this century, we started with the geotechnical applications. This part of the presentation about 3D PIV was prepared by Sam Stanier of the University of Cambridge. For PIV, we rely on a good image texture, so we need good photos, and we need to know when they were taken exactly in comparison to other measurements done in the test. And this is not easy. And in the University of Cambridge, they know a lot about this. And you need appropriate photogrammetric models, software, to make to interpret the results. Now, recently, 3D applications of PIV has started, and I will show you some examples. One example is this odometric frost heave apparatus. This is not really 3D, it's pseudo 3D. This is in Cambridge, and we have a cylindrical sample, 10 centimeters wide, diameter, 20 centimeters high. And it has a double cell with the internal vacuum. to provide insulation because we have frost heave, so the temperature is very important, and to prevent condense occurring on the glass. Of course, it's frost heave. That means that there will be a very low temperature at the bottom of the sample, higher temperature upper, and then we see that the sample increases in height and ice lenses can occur. And when we thaw, the opposite happens. And they captured the deformations with a single camera. Only you see the camera in the photo, one shot calibration, and they used the constant radius of the sample to calibrate their photos. And that was not easy. It was circular, so things got deformed, and the classical software, OpenCV, did not perform very well, and therefore they have developed new software to compensate for different types of errors, and that reduced the errors a lot. And this research allows new insights into frost heave and freeze-thaw cycles. Another research was originally done by Australian University of West Australia and later developed by Cambridge and ICL. And here we see 6 cameras around the triaxial apparatus. And those cameras, if you look closely, you see a green rectangular thing. That's the Raspberry Pi 0W. And that was combined with a high quality cameras. In this set of each cameras with that Raspberry thing is a relatively cheap thing. So labs can afford to buy several of these things. And this was developed further by Cambridge, and they used an UDP controlled acquisition system, and they are still developing this to be able to have a really synchronized interpretation of the data. This PIV-driven 3-point cloud analysis. And the result of this PIV work is that we have a very, very precise measurement of the displacement, micro precision. Another example is multi-camera measurement of centrifuge sample surface. Again, those green plates, the Raspberry Pi 0W, and a camera array this time. And this is strictly spoken not PIV, but structure from motion analysis. But the idea is the same, and results look like this. So here we see in the right-hand side the vertical displacement measured with this system. In this case, we have a slope with a pipe underneath. And the 3D surface and topographical measurements were done with these cameras. So this system can be used for other construction modeling, such as tunneling induced settlements too. The University of Cambridge is continuing her developments and to further acquire image synchronously, and then analyze multiple image streams. And finally, they will make available simple and open source packages in Python to do this work. So the basic idea of 3D PIV is that we use more than one camera, like the human eyes. Then you can make 3D pictures. In Deltares, this ability was developed too, and in 2012 we developed the possibility to cope with the refraction surface, and that means that we can look through water, and the breaking index of the water is compensated. And a few years ago, we continued with measuring the scour development around an offshore foundation in a lab experiment. And for this, we needed 3 sets of 2 fixed cameras in underwater housing. And then you see we have a perfect three-dimensional picture of the deformations in time due to scour. So far, PIV. I will continue with optic fibers. And optic fibers are basically used to measure temperature, acoustics, or strains. And here we see strains. You can create a plot, a three-dimensional plot, both in length, both in time and in length domain. Here we see the development of strains along the time, which is on the left-hand side axis. Here, the time. Now, from these strains, it is possible to determine XYZ deformations, and I am personally very enthusiastic about this new development. The basic idea is to make a combination of several optic fibers, for example, like this. And when we have this combination, then we can determine the XYZ deformation in the soil body exactly. And now for perhaps the project that Mark Schneider has presented, we have used this system. And here we see of the supplier nerve sensor systems, we see a lab version and an in situ version of this XYZ test measurement system. And here we see at the left-hand side a small test setup of Deltares in the Netherlands, and on the right-hand side the larger setup in Darmstadt, which was shown by Mark too. Here you see the piles, and then above this we see sand with this system installed. So here we see the XYZ deformation fibers. This is the final test setup. And here we see, which is important, as we, with this system, we can only measure the relative XYZ set deformations in comparison to other locations of the fiber, but some reference system is needed to know the exact XYZ deformation. And here we see how we did this. We used cables to measure the exact displacement of certain points of the fibers. And this is the result. We see in a sequence of measurement lines of one of the fibers in time. You see it settles and you recognize the locations of the piles. So far, deformations. I will continue my presentation with some measurement systems that are used to characterize a soil body. And I will first go into the word tomography, because there are several measurement techniques that use this word. And this is tomography means this is technique for imaging the subsurface that uses any kind of penetrating wave. So in this picture, we see S1 and S2. Those are tomography images, while P is this not, because this is more a looking through thing, but the S1 and S2 is a cross-section made by a certain penetrating wave. And when we have several of these pictures, then you can produce a three-dimensional picture too. So both 2D slices and full 3D images are possible with any kind of waves. There are many examples where that word tomography is used. So like electrical resistivity tomography, ERT, I will show you this, ground penetrating radar, seismic tomography, X-ray, and there are many more. Sorry. The characterization with waves, then we have different types of waves, like mechanical waves, which are seismic or acoustic, electrical currents, then we have transport of electrons, and we have electromagnetic waves, and we will go along these three. So first, the mechanical waves that can be acoustic waves or seismic waves, so moving air or water or moving solid matter. So acoustic waves are used by sonar boats to measure the depth, for example, of the sea where the boat is going. And other applications another application is shown here. Here, scour around the structure is being measured using this acoustic system. We can there measure scour, but we can also, for example, measure the thickness of a slip layer. Then we use a high frequency to measure the top of the slip layer and a low frequency to measure the bottom of the slip layer. And this frequency is important to be aware. When we have a high frequency, then we have a small wavelength, then we can look through things close by, not so far, but it is very precise. And when we have a low frequency, so a long wavelength, then we can go much further with any system, but it is less precise. So you can look close by and then it's precise, or you can look further away and then it's less precise. With acoustic signals, we can also measure a temperature distribution, which has been used, for example, for storage applications and leak detection. We have done quite some experiments with this in Deltares. And then we continue with mechanical waves, and then the seismic waves, and then the Bender elements. Julia has shown this already. Here we see two Bender elements in the hand of this person, and the application of it in a triaxial test apparatus. And then the Bender element at one side applies a small pulse in the soil with an electric current. So it is a mechanical wave induced by an electric current. And then on the other side, the Bender element feels what happens. And then what we measure is the velocity of the wave and the amplitude of the wave. And here we see the difference in time between the peak of sending and the peak of receiving, the input and the output signal, and this gives the velocity of the wave. And then Julia has just shown you these experiments, very nice, in the centrifuge, which can give a picture of the soil body, of the small strain stiffness in the soil body. And at Deltares, we are currently also developing this test setup, or a similar test setup for centrifuge tests. So far, mechanical waves, then electric current and electromagnetic waves, I will tell you. Starting with electrical currents, and that's the electrical resistivity tomography, a well-known technique, applied a lot in the fields and also in the lab. We have quite some experience in the lab with using this technique, and it works like this. We have two current electrodes, A and B, and these induce an electrical field like this. And then the resistance between these, the potential difference between these two electrodes, M and N, is measured. And combining these currents between A and B, which we know, the distance between these four electrodes and potential difference of M and N, gives you an apparent resistivity, which is shown now here on this graph. And what is this resistivity? Well, that is a material property. It is the resistance for electrical current per unit of volume of this material. And now in this picture, we see an area with a low resistivity, the upper layer, and a high resistivity. Now, if we move this test setup like this, and then like this, we see in the graph below that we have in all the time more or less the same apparent resistivity, which is clear because we have sort of same layered system. Then we move it again, and now we see that the resistivity decreases. And now it is at its lowest because it does not see the high resistivity area anymore, layer anymore. And there it comes back. Now from this, we can determine that this is a good location to take a soil sample. And the results of such an, not the one before, but of an ERT series can be like this. We see a lot of colors with that all indicate resistivity. And here we have a graph that shows the relationships between different types of soil or water and this resistivity. And that's, yeah, there's some choice, as you see. Therefore, it's useful to also have a borehole, which was done in this case. And there we know which type of soil, and so we can make a full profile. The system of ERT gives you a kind of blocks of volume, units of volume, units of soil that has a certain resistivity. And so you does not immediately look into the soil. You don't have your results immediately, but it is very robust. It is going deep. If you put the electrodes far enough of each other, it is very useful. And currently several new techniques using this technique, new test setup using these techniques are under development. Also at Deltares. Here you see such an electrode. It's very important to have good contact between soil and electrodes. Now in the lab, we have measured temperature distribution, and we are developing possibilities to measure PA membrane in the field, and we test this in the lab. Now electromagnetic waves. Here we see the scales of wavelength, which is related to the frequency of electromagnetic waves. And this is the visible area of these wavelengths. And here we have the other types of waves: gamma waves, X-rays, ultraviolet, infrared, microwave, and different types of radio waves. So radio waves have very long wavelength, so they come very far. And the gamma rays on the other side, they're very small wavelength, high frequency, so they do not go far, but they can give very precise results. Now LiDAR or scan systems use these frequencies. Infrared is part of that, is there. INSAR or other satellites use a frequency around this, and ground penetrating radar uses frequencies like this. And I will show you one slide about LiDAR and INSAR, and then I will shortly go into infrared and ground penetrating radar. So LiDAR and INSAR are both scanning techniques. We can scan a surface. The INSAR is from a satellite, and LiDAR can be done from an airplane or a drone, or just a 3D scanner in a lab. We're also doing this for PEPSTR, for example. And then infrared. This part was contributed by Barcelona University. The idea is that wet soil has, and the purpose of these measurements is to determine the saturation of the soil. So fully saturated, fully dry, or somewhere in between. And here in the right-hand side picture, we see in Deltares centrifuge test, and we see where the groundwater level is. It's here. You see that this sand, which basically has the same color as this sand, is much darker. And here you see also much darker sand than here, which is the same layer. So wet soil has darker color than dry soil. And why? Well, this is the result of the interaction between light and matter. There's water around the grains, and this changes the scattering and the absorption of incident light. The more water, the more light absorption, both in the visual range, but specifically a lot in the infrared range, and then specifically between those wavelengths. Well, here we see this. Here we see the difference between dry and wet soil. That's only the difference, and you see the difference is higher in this range and higher in this range. This is the wavelength. Now they did very nice experiments. They took dry desert sand and they made pictures using infrared lights, and then they made it wetter and wetter and wetter until it was fully saturated. And you see this is a light picture, this is a dark picture, and we can measure this with the computer. That's a pixel intensity, PI. And here we have the normalized pixel intensity. And from this, Parera made a curve, constructed a curve giving the normalized pixel intensity on one axis and a degree of saturation on another axis. Well, this technique is still under development. For example, how usable it is through plexiglass is still to be determined, but it is a promising technique.
We are getting to the end of the session, Suzanne.
Yeah, this is the last subject.
Okay.
The ground penetrating radar. The idea is we have a transmitting antenna and a receiving antenna, and the waves go through the soil and they deflect at the boundaries of the different layers. And this is a nice animation. We see, I go back, there is a difference in the layer, but there's also a pipe. And the pipe is visible in advance because it's conical shape. And the result is what we see here. We see a parabolic shaped thing, which indicates there is a pipe. I will show once more. So these radar techniques, here we see cables and pipes, those typical parabolic shapes in the results. And this is another example for the thickness of asphalt. This technique is quick, very quick. You have immediately result. You can in the field see where your pipe is. Oh, sorry for the Dutch. It's used in roads, levees, and to determine where objects are buried, like pipes and tubes or anchors. I used it recently. It's done on railways also, and we can use this in labs too, and we use the higher frequencies because of the small scale of lab tests. Now this brings us to the end of this presentation, and I would like to repeat the first message. Please contact the facility. If you are thinking about starting a project or preparing a proposal, discuss the possibilities for measurement techniques. I thank you for the attention.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. Very nice overview. I hope it is an inspiration to the participants to come up with nice ideas, nice proposals.